As the year of 2020 began, so did the new Grain Academy. By January, a plan had already been implemented, and construction of the new exhibit was well underway. Everything from the original Grain Academy had been moved to Pioneer Acres, from the various displays and signs, down to the carpets. Pioneer Acres was able to acquire this original 1906-built Canadian Pacific wooden grain boxcar. During the steam era, boxcars much like this one were routinely used for hauling grain across Canada. The wooden ones were eventually replaced with more robust steel cars later on. This particular car served the CPR and active grain service for many years. Upon its retirement, the car found itself on a farm near Carstairs, Alberta, where the property owners used it as a storage shed. The trucks, couplers, grab irons, ladders, and many other metal components had been removed when it was retired. In late 2019, it found its way to the new Grain Academy. This car is in remarkable condition for its age, with many of its original boards still intact despite being 116 years old and spending a majority of its life outdoors. There was, however, one part of the museum that had not yet begun construction at this time, the model railway. However, before the new railway could begin, the old one had to end. October of 2019 marked the official end for the original Grain Academy. The model railway maintainer team showed up one last time to dismantle the old train display and salvage what they could. Mixed feelings were apparent for those involved that day. It was with a heavy heart the equipment, structures, and few salvageable scenery items were removed, knowing this was the last time anyone would see the original layout as a complete display ever again. Some believe this display could be broken into sections, moved, and reassembled at Pioneer Acres. This task would have been impossible, as the massive display was built specifically for the BMO Centre location, and would not easily fit in the new museum. Age had also made elements of the old layout brittle, or would simply be too heavy to relocate easily. A relocation also was likely to cause even more issues than what already existed for this near 40-year-old layout. The trains, buildings, bridges, even most of the trees were savable. However, some trees had dried with age and would crumble if disturbed. By the end of that day, what remained of the original Grain Academy model railway almost resembled the abandoned rail lines of Canada. The optimism of the future made this bitter end bearable, as with the end of one great railroad marks the beginning of another. Since its completion in 1885, the Canadian Pacific Railway has played a huge role in getting Canada's grain to the world market, and continues to this day. For over 100 years, both of Canada's major railways have hauled millions of tons of grain annually. Canadian National runs just outside of Pioneer Acres, and on occasion, grain trains can be seen in action. Canada manages to export 110,232,000 bushels, or 3 million tons of wheat annually. That equates to 48% of total global exports every year. In a good year, grain production in Canada has exceeded 2 billion bushels, or 500 million tons, all thanks to the thousands of prairie farmers and the railways. Our mission for the new museum layout was to tell the basic story of the railway's part in agriculture in this 13.5 by 30 foot space as accurately as possible. The railway we chose to replicate was the CPR, as it is the oldest and best known in Canada. Like any model railway, Step 1 was to create a basic plan for the display. This shape was chosen to add a little extra interest to a rather dull corner, and maximize the amount of scenes that could be added for visitor enjoyment. With a solid plan in place, work could begin on the exterior display case. With the external skeleton of the display now built, the fun could start, adding the model trains. A track plan was the first part of this process. After a basic SketchUp and a quick double check with some track pieces, it was time to lay the base. The base for this display is styrofoam panels, cut or paired as scenes required them. Internal supports, also made out of foam, were added to prevent sagging over time. Only the main areas where the track was to be laid were installed at this point. These are the keystone areas. The rest would be filled in later as construction progressed. This side of the display would become the Alberta side, depicting how grain is grown, harvested, and transported from the province. It was decided that the best area to start with would be the small town, which would be front and center. The first section of track laid was the Alberta side mountain grade that looped downward inside the mountain and emerged at the bottom where the train would enter the town. It was important that this track section worked flawlessly before anything else was built. The test locomotive used was an old Athearn Blue Box GP9, which had been custom modified to look like a CP Rail GP9U. This engine and an identical sister were part of the old Grain Academy train layout. This layout was designed as a museum display and intended to run constantly with little to no issues. Taking lessons from its predecessor's pitfalls and many years of experience in the model railroad hobby, it was decided that no turnouts could be on the main line. The gaps in the rails can cause derailments, especially when temperature changes or the moisture level fluctuates. However, you can't have grain elevators and sidings with no turnouts. The solution was a facade, a false switch as we called them. Using Shinohara switches from the old layout, we cut them up and laid the rails around the right-of-way accordingly to look like a turnout without actually installing one. Now the train would stay on the rails, yet there is the illusion that a turnout is cut in, so we can have the sidings and spurs associated with the grain industry. The Vancouver side track plan was a simple return loop, with an uphill grade behind the grain terminal to bring the train back up to the mountainside. Essentially, the new layout's track plan is a hidden figure eight. The most important part of track work is testing. March 21st of 2020 saw the completion of the track work. This was the first time our lead locomotive 9623 officially ran a full loop around the layout. The locomotive also ran tests with 11 freight cars to see how they would all perform together. It was an all-round success. While the layout construction was underway on-site, other details are being constructed elsewhere, in the Gale shops. Here, all the locomotives in rolling stock received weathering to look more realistic. The weathering was not too basic, but also not too detailed, mostly consisting of enamel washes and airbrushing, with some powders and dry brush effects to enhance specific pieces. Two of the cars received a more detailed pitted rust chipping effect for something just a little different. For this new layout, we opted to go more old school and run everything analog. It was decided that all operating locomotives would be Athearn Blue Box, as the old Athearns will run forever with little maintenance, perfect for a museum display that demands constant running. The old layout in Calgary used Kato AC 4400s. While more finely detailed and quieter, they could not handle the constant abuse of daily running for hours on end, year after year. The Katos would need a mechanical rebuild every year or two, whereas an Athearn Blue Box would just need to be relubricated at the start of every season, and will last years before they require any major maintenance. A pair of Athearn Blue Box AC 4400 CWs were spruced up with a little fine-tuning and some added details. The leader was also fitted with some high-intensity LEDs for the headlights and ditch lights, better simulating the appearance of real locomotives. Since the trailing unit will never lead, it received some MV lenses, simulating real lights that are turned off. These units were tuned specifically to work together back to back. The Intermountain cylindrical grain cars were fragile and had a tendency to derail when run constantly. For the new layout, Walther's mainline hoppers were used. These cars are more robust, and with molded-on ladders and thicker plastic roof walks, they are far less likely to crumble during a derailment. The Walther's couplers also stay hooked together extremely well, even on the grades. One of the Walther's grain cars was custom painted into the Alberta scheme, and had a track cleaning pad installed to help the train's performance just a little more. Other cars used were AccuRail CP Rail Centerflow hoppers and some Athearn Blue Box cars of various types. The rest of the cars and locomotives are designed to be static display pieces, except for one Blue Box SD40-2, which is set up as a spare locomotive in the event the lead AC 4400 needs to be pulled from service for extended maintenance. It can also be a stand-in for the trailing unit if necessary. With the track work complete and the trains ready for service, it was officially time for Phase 3. The next part of this story will see the Alberta side of the new Grain Academy model train display come to life as we add lights, buildings, and scenery.